activist. I'm the spokesperson for a UK-based NGO called British Solidarity for Syria, where we've been active over the past 15, 16 months, trying to raise awareness about what's happening in Syria all over the UK. I was hoping to show you something, but sadly, I don't think there's any audio on this. So even if I press play, we can have a go and see how bad we can make it, but let's see how this goes. So this is just some scenes of... Yeah, but the laptop, you should hear it.
The music. Eh? The music. Oh.
Thank you. I've got a degree in IT, but... الله الرحمن الرحيم. سبحان الذي أسرى بعبده ليلا من المسجد الحرام إلى المسجد الأقصى الذي باركنا حوله. مسجد الأقصى الذي باركنا حوله. Surah Al-Isra, the very first verse. Glorified be He who took His servant on the night of the journey from Mecca to Masjid Al-Aqsa in Jerusalem, الذي باركنا حوله, which we have blessed the land surrounding it. This is Syria mentioned in the Quran. The land around Masjid Al-Aqsa, what we today call Palestine, Lebanon, Syria and Jordan, is mentioned in the Quran as being a land that is blessed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I've done this talk a couple of times, and often I find that people don't actually know very much about Syria in the first place. Some may not even know where it is. So I'll use the first couple of minutes of this to actually try and give you, well, don't look at my hand, I'll have to go. I'll try and give you some information about Syria in the first place. If it opens, that is. So for those who do know the geography very well, the Mediterranean Sea along the west side of this picture, where it says Syria, this is what we now have. It's a population of about 23 million people. And amongst these 23 million people, we've got 19 different religious and ethnic sects. Ethnically, we have the Arabs, we have the Kurds, we have Armenians, we have Circassians, we've got a broad range. Within the religious groups, there are the Muslims who are divided amongst Sunni, Shia, Alawi, and among the Christians, which we have the Copts, the Orthodox, the Catholics, as well as a very, very small, actually, minority of Jews. So it's a very complicated country, ethnically and religiously. Its capital, Damascus, is the oldest capital in the world. It has been inhabited since 10,000 BC. It predates the Parthenon, it predates the pyramids. It's the oldest continuously inhabited country in the world, and most of Syria comes under the heritage, the UNESCO World Heritage Site. Historically, we refer to it as the Levant in English, or Bilad al-Sham, as we know it in Arabic. From the 16th century to the 20th century, it was part of what we call the Ottoman Empire, the Ottomani. 1920, independence, it became under the ruling of King Faisal of Saudi. It was the greater kingdom of Syria, which included not only today called Syria, but the area around it as well. In 1922, we can thank the western part of this world for chopping up most of the Middle East post-Ottoman Empire, and we've got what we have today with the Sykes-Picot Accord. But this is the history of the last 100 years. 1946, Syria gains its independence from the French, and it tries to implement the first steps towards having a democracy. Syria at the time was no more than 7 million people, so it was by far smaller than it is today. And a number of governments took power from after 1946, some more successful than others, some lasted a year or two, some lasted literally days. But we had continuous changes until we were trying to find a type of government that would work in Syria. And in 1963 we had a coup where what we call the Ba'ath Party came into power. It declared itself as the only sole party that can represent the country, as the only party that can actually rule Syria, and it continues to rule Syria until today. One party. In 1970, this man here, who was an Air Force lieutenant, conducted an internal coup within the Ba'ath Party and took power. He declared the state of emergency, which meant that anybody within the security, the intelligence, the military, could arrest any person in the country, could beat up and torture any person in the country, could kill any person in the country, without the rule of law even touching. That is what state of emergency stands for. The military and the intelligence and security forces are untouchable. They can abuse millions of people and nobody can even take them to court. He ruled Syria with an iron fist up until he died in 2000. In that period, late 70s, early 80s, there was a movement that tried to overthrow him, which came to an end after a major massacre in the city of Hama. 1982, Hafiz al-Assad's brother, Rifat, sent his elite forces to surround the city of Hama and shelled it for 20 consecutive days. The result was approximately 40,000 people dead within 3 weeks. 2/3 of the city were leveled. Syrians 200 kilometers away in other cities did not even know until months after that something had happened in Hama. This was done at an era where we didn't have Twitter, we didn't have Facebook, we didn't even have the mobile phone to actually send a text message to others saying, look, the situation is bad over here. Very few journalists were present. Robert Fisk, I don't know if anybody knows him, but Robert Fisk was one of the very few. And he gave an account of clearly seeing Assad's men in their resembling pink uniforms, pink military uniforms, surrounding the city and shelling it. Hafiz died in 2000, and in true dictatorship style, he handed over to his slightly better looking son. So Bashar al-Assad took power in 2000, Politically, a lot of people thought that he was going to bring change to the country. He was a trained doctor, after all, who trained just in the capital, in London. What followed was a sort of a honeymoon period for a few months. We call it the Damascus Springs, where he released a few of the political detainees. He allowed some newspapers to actually be, some independent newspapers to start printing. And the whole honeymoon lasted about 9 months, in which case he arrested those that he released again. Those he couldn't arrest, he sent them out of the country to exile, and he closed down the independent newspapers that he opened in the first place. So he went back into a very similar situation that we had under his father. Syria today continues to be ruled by a family, not by a state, not by a government, not even by a group of elite. It's just literally a family. They are intelligent enough to know that in order to control 23 million people, there are 3 things you have to control. Number 1, the economy. This guy over here, Mr. Rami Makhlouf, he is the president's cousin. He controls, under his own personal fortune, 60% of Syria's economy. The second man is the president's brother-in-law, Asif Shaukat. He controls the intelligence, arguably the most feared man in the country. The intelligence forces within Syria are made up of literally hundreds of thousands of people. You don't know when you're being spied upon. It could be a member of your family. It is the headmaster, it is the taxi driver, it is even the person who cleans the floor in the school. Could be working ultimately for this man in the middle. And if you say something that challenges the regime's authority, what will likely happen is a knock on your door the very next day. And third, military. This man here, Maher al-Assad, is the president's younger brother. He controls the strongest battalion or armored division within the military, the 4th Armored Division, and he has control over the vast spectrum of the Syrian military in Syria. So, since 1970 until now, Syria has been ruled by a group of family members, just like any mafia would. This went on until March 2011. In March 2011, a group of people that are very close to your age group, school children between the ages of 12 and 16, inspired by what they saw on the satellite screens in Tunisia, in Egypt, in Libya, and in Yemen, dared to challenge the authority of the regime by getting some spray cans and spraying Al-Sha'b Yurid Asqat al-Nizam on the walls of their town. The people, the nation, wants to overthrow the regime. They shook the foundations of a 42-year-old system, no more than a dozen of them. And what resulted is that these children were arrested, were tortured, beaten up, and when the elders of the city of Daraa went to the intelligence branch to ask, to beg for the children to be released, they met the head of military intelligence, again, somebody very close to the president himself. And he told them, forget that you have children. In fact, if you want children, bring us your wives. And my men will make sure you get better ones. For anybody in this room, for any Arab, for any Muslim, for any man of humanity will know that in that part of the world, where we come from, there could not be a high degree of an insult to give, not to people like you and I, but to the elders of the tribes, of the village, of the areas that were over there. And that was the spark. Together with some intellectuals in the city of Damascus, the region of Syria erupted. That was all that was required. If you take an analogy, if the grass is dry. All it takes is one match to light it up. And that was what was required in Syria to set the whole country alight. This is what followed. Women, children, men, taken out of the streets. It started from Daraa. And when Daraa started and the regime sent its forces to attack it, Homs rose. And when, Hama. And when Hama was attacked, Homs. And when Homs was attacked, Idlib. And when Idlib was attacked, Damascus. And when Damascus was attacked, Latakia, Tartus. City after city, they would rise in solidarity with a neighboring city that was brutally crushed. And in Syria, the demonstrations are made up exactly as this room is made up. Men, women of all ages, taking hand to hand, shouting one thing: the people want to get rid of this regime. The demands, simple: justice, freedom. People just wanted to live in dignity. People wanted to be able to not be cursed by somebody who has a 0 degree of education, but because he works at the security branch, would come and beat you up, arrest you, insult your family, insult your honor, simply because he is a member of the intelligence force. This is what followed. Syrians found out, as they were expected, that Syria is not a country that you can make these demands without suffering the consequences. These are just some of the images. The regime used its shabiha. Shabiha is a term for thugs, ghostly thugs, ferocious thugs. In some cases, it would use its military, formally. They're not much better in most instances. In other cases, it would use these paramilitary. They're not officially part of the military. They are just thugs who the regime will happily give them weapons and tell them to do all their dirty business that they want them to do. Demonstrations did not stop. People continued going to the streets. And then the regime had to find a way to end that because it knew that was a direct threat to its being in power. Until today, it's quite common that if people take to the streets, machine guns, snipers, and even tank shells will land upon them. It gets much worse than this, but there is a limit as to what I can show you. In case you're wondering, these here are bodies. They are quite proud to actually take pictures of themselves abusing what can sometimes be alive and other times can actually be dead bodies. And then, when the people were still not intimidated, when people still had the courage to continue calling for what is rightfully theirs, the regime decided that it had to bring the big guns out. And this is what we started seeing from approximately November of 2011, when the Assad regime realized that it was too high risk and too costly, too much effort to send its troops all the time, so it's even easier to just level entire quarters, entire districts of cities, towns and villages. Mosques and churches were not left idle. In many cases, mosques were deliberately targeted because the regime knew that people seek refuge within a mosque, within a school, within a church. In many of these mosques, they would go inside and write their famous slogans. La ilaha illa Bashar. Astaghfirullah. Amma al-Asad, amma nahr al-balad. Either Assad or we burn the country down. This was a simple message. that they wanted to imprint in the mind of anybody that dared to criticize them. The video that I showed you was slightly old. It was produced close to Christmas time. So the numbers that you saw in it were way out of date. So far, we have accounted for at least 15,000 people that have officially been killed. There are many more which we may not know about. But we know we have lost at least that many because we have managed to get names and confirmed places of death. Many still sit under rubble. Many are under mass graves that the Assad regime put them in. Key numbers are 200,000 plus incarcerated. We don't know the exact number of how many people are in a torture chamber or in a mass prison or jail. One of my relatives who spent some time and was lucky enough to come out told me that in a room approximately this size, there were 50 of them. When they wanted to sleep, they had to lie on their sides, and that still left about 10 of them standing. They would take shifts on how to sleep. Torture was part of the daily routine. Every time that the guards wanted to pass their time, they'd bring a few, beat them up, burn them, electrocute them. He told me that he saw some of the most horrific equipment, what they call the Syrian chair. It's a chair that you sit on and snaps backwards, literally able to break your back in half. Beds in which they're tied with their arms and legs stretched and pulling them in order to cause as much suffering as possible. And it's not just men that are in these jails. Women and even children. The most well-known case is that of Hamza al-Khatib, a 13-year-old kid from Daraa, who was taken during a protest. He was returned to his mother and father as a dead body, neck broken, bullets entering one side of his arm and into his body, and even his genitals cut off. I can't imagine what can a 13-year-old do in order to deserve this. Too many people become desensitized. To them, this just becomes numbers, because every day, on average, 50 people will get killed in Syria. But it is not numbers. It's people in this particular age group that suffer the most. Hamza was only 13. There was another Hamza al-Bakur, who was 15. When Baba Amr, the district of Homs, was shelled, he lost half his face. Videos circulated around the world of Hamza al-Bakur without a jaw, just pieces of flesh hanging, still alive. He remained alive for almost a day. Doctors tried all they can, but they had next to zero medical equipment necessary to help him. Even younger ones. Afaf was only 4 months old. She was traveling from Hama with her mother and father, and all 3 of them were arrested. Hama to Aleppo was about 250 kilometers. They were stopped at the military checkpoint, and Afaf was arrested with her parents. A few days later, 4-month-old Afaf, wrapped in a white cloth, was returned to her uncle as a dead body. She was killed, she died under the custody of the intelligence forces. Stories like these echo throughout Syria. And even mothers. The story of Talal from Sarmin. At 6 o'clock in the morning, the regime, they had that most horrific knock on the door by the military forces. She had 3 sons, Yusuf, Bilal, and Talal, 22, 24, and 26 years old respectively. All young men They took them because in the yard, one of them had a motorcycle. She begged to let them go. She begged to not take them, and she was hit with the back of a rifle. She and her husband stayed at home. They wouldn't dare go out because the military was still walking on the streets, going house to house. An hour later, the military forces had left the town, and the neighbors came knocking on the door asking them for water to put down the fire. They run out with buckets of water to find a pile of bodies and motorcycles. In that pile, Yusuf, Bilal and Talal were burning. There is a story of Uday from Syria. Uday was only 16. He was a student. He was taken while they raided the town. He was only to be rounded up on the street. Again, 2 hours later, his mother found him in a pile about 100 meters from the house. You don't know. When they come to your house, nobody knows what's going to happen. Those that are lucky get taken to a prison to be tortured. Those who are unlucky are found a few yards down the road. The examples are countless. There's one, only a couple of months ago, we had a girl in Damascus. She was arrested for one crime. She held a piece of paper in central Damascus that read, "Stop the killing. We want to build a Syria for all Syrians." Countless girls have been arrested, have been raped, have been killed. Girls in Homs are going to the ulama asking them for fatwas to abort a child that they have conceived as a result of rape by the military. When working with medical organizations, one of the things that they're being asked for in terms of medicine is contraceptives, because it becomes systematic. In our culture, in Muslim culture in general, it is common, it is known that to rape a young girl can destroy an entire family. And they use that technique. If a brother is an activist, if the father is an activist, and they can't reach him, they'll happily go and arrest his daughter, his wife, hold them in prison, rape them, kill them, in order to reach the brother of the father. Recent events in the past month, these were not the first, and sadly I don't think they will be the last, but we had these two massacres that took place, that it had to take for these atrocities to happen, for media to get a little bit of attention, and for the international community to start talking a little bit more about Syria. In Hula, 106 people were murdered, not as a result of shells, but because these Shabiha, these paramilitary forces that I talked to you about, went door to door and slit the throats and stabbed 50 children and a further 15 men and women. The videos are too horrific for anybody to watch. There's not many people that can stomach seeing a 5-year-old with his head cut off. The week after, in Kubayr, just outside Haman, exactly the same. Kubayr is a hamlet. It's made literally, the population of Kubayr is 150 people. The men had gone, and they found women and children. Half the population. 6 survived. One child survived and is extremely traumatized, and in order to remain alive, he had painted himself with blood, so that they think that he's dead. And these are the ones that we can tell, that we know about. Syria has thousands of villages, and many don't even have the communication equipment to tell us what is happening. How you can help? At its lowest, I want everybody to at least remember Syria. When you go to your masjid, ask your imam that when he does his dua at the end, to not forget the orphans, the women, the children. Ramadan is coming up. Try to make more of these. I think this is a great example of how youth groups can actually raise awareness, can raise even some money to help those who are in need. Start thinking politically. Start thinking about lobbying. Every one of us has an MP that is supposed to listen to them. Write to them, ask them what are they doing to help what's happening in Syria. So far, the UK government has spoken a lot, acted little. And finally, if you feel that you've got an idea, that you want to reach somebody, you want to get some more information, ask us. We are available. You'll grab some of our leaflets. We are on Facebook, we are on Twitter, we are online, we are physically in most cities in the UK, whether it's in London or Manchester or Birmingham. We are around to help. For most of us, this has become almost a second job. Most seriously. I want you to go home and at least tell your parents. I find this sad. I've been to many masajid around the country, and people ask me, when they see a new face, Salam alaikum, what's your name? Wahab, where are you from? I'm from Syria. Oh, I heard something is going wrong over there. You'll be surprised. Hopefully, it's not amongst your families and your immediate communities, but you'll be surprised how many people know absolutely nothing. And while we know nothing, then we can't do anything. For the Muslims, Syria should become on the top of the agenda. Because I said at the very beginning, Bilad al-Sham is a land that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed. And unless we can bring stability to Bilad al-Sham, we can't expect stability in any other Muslim land. Jazakumullah khair. Thank you all very much.